and welcome back to our Standing Watch program. Some have recently claimed that the Bible nowhere mentions the United States of America. But as we have seen in our last program, that statement is false. And as we are going to explore in this program and in subsequent programs the further origins of the United States of America as revealed in Scripture, you will have to agree with me. In the last program, we pointed out how Abraham was tremendously blessed by God because he was obedient to him, and how those same blessings then would be passed on to his descendants, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and finally the sons of Joseph in Egypt, Ephraim and Manasseh. And we learned that Jacob blessed his grandchildren and said that they would become a great nation and a company or a commonwealth of nations. Now, as I will show you today, nowhere in Old Testament times have these prophecies been fulfilled, have these blessings actually been obtained by the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh. But in order to ascertain that God is not a liar, which he is not, we must then find those prophecies fulfilled in subsequent nations. And that is exactly what historical records indicate. Now, to pick up the story where we left it off last time, when Joseph died in Egypt, a new Pharaoh came into power, and he didn't know anything about what Joseph had done, and he started to enslave the Israelites, who had now begun to multiply, those descendants of Jacob, and of course Joseph and others. And so finally they were freed by Moses and they were brought out of slavery. And in the process of time, Joshua actually brought them into the promised land, the land of Canaan, the land which was promised to them. But even at that time, those prophecies which had been given to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph and so on were not fulfilled. And so we find that later the Israelites wanted to have a king ruling over them as all the other nations had kings. And Samuel was very distraught by that, saying that you are sinning and asking for a king. But God told him to heed their wishes because they had not rejected Samuel, they had rejected God. And so God gave them a king, King Saul. He was actually the first king over the entire nation of Israel. But King Saul was not an obedient person. He rebelled against God. It became so bad that he actually resorted to witchcraft and sorcery. And so God rejected King Saul, and then he made a man after his own heart a king. And that name, of course, was David. And so King David became the king over the nation of Israel. Notice, these were not multiple nations. These were not a company or a commonwealth of nations. This was just one big nation. Unfortunately, David's son Solomon did not follow the lead of his father, and he became a person who rejected God, who got engaged in idolatry. He had many foreign wives who kind of led him into rebellion against God. And so God then said that he will take away the kingdom from Solomon, and actually from Solomon's son. But because of David's line would still be ruling over one tribe, the tribe of Judah. But the rest of the Israelites would then depart from Judah and become a different power block. And when it comes to the time of Solomon's son, this is what happened, and the nation split. And from that time forward, you find references in the Bible to two different nations. The one was called the house of Israel, and the other one was called the house of Judah. Now, the house of Judah consisted of the Jews, the tribe of Judah. And then later Levites and also parts of Benjamin would join that particular power block. But please notice that the house of Israel, consisting of all the other tribes, were not Jews. They were not part of the house of Judah at all. It was a completely different nation. And Joseph's descendants, Ephraim and Manasseh, belonged to the house of Israel, not the house of Judah. And that, my friend, is where the crux of the matter begins. That is where most of these TV evangelists and preachers and Bible commentators totally miss the boat, where they totally confuse prophecies which are given to the house of Israel, thinking they apply to the Jews, which they don't. The house of Israel has nothing to do with the Jews or the house of Judah. And the entire rest of the Old Testament points out the fact that there were two different nations, and sometimes they were even at war with each other, and Israel would fight against Judah. And then later the house of Israel was brought into captivity by the Assyrians. But the house of Judah remained for a while until several hundred years later they also went into captivity by the Babylonians. But we read in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah that the Jews, or the house of Judah, many of them returned to Jerusalem after they had been transported to Babylon. But you see, the house of Israel never returned. And the Bible in the Old Testament never then talks about the former fate of the house of Israel after they were brought into captivity. But they had to end up somewhere. Such a big nation like the house of Israel couldn't just totally disappear from the world scene, and so they survived. And you find in the New Testament references to the house of Israel, to those who were living in different parts of the world. In the book of James, in the letter of James, James addresses those who were living in the diaspora, or diaspora, however you want to pronounce it. Jesus Christ even said that he was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You see, not only to the Jews, but also to the house of Israel. And so the apostles would then later go and preach the gospel to those nations. They knew where they could be found. The house of Israel still exists today, and the nations of Ephraim and Manasseh still exist today. Let me also tell you, my friends, that during the time of the house of Israel in the Old Testament, they never became a commonwealth of nations. They were still one nation. And so we know from that prophecy alone that the fulfillment still had to occur subsequently. It is a remarkable story when you think about the fact that the house of Israel exists today, that the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh exist today, and they are not Jews. The state of Israel is composed of and comprised of descendants of the house of Judah, the Jews. But the house of Israel is not Jewish, never has been Jewish. And that is a tremendously important understanding which you need to have in order to comprehend the prophecies which were given to the house of Israel, to Joseph and his descendants, Ephraim and Manasseh. And as I already indicated last time, there is only one power block in more recent times which can be identified as a commonwealth of nations. And that power block is, of course, the British Commonwealth. And there is only one great nation, which is not Jewish, but it is a descendant from the house of Israel, which can be called great, and that is the United States of America. And so we have to understand, my friends, that the prophecies given to the Jews are totally different and apart from the prophecies given to the house of Israel and to the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh. And in addition to that, God also made a promise to King David, saying that his throne would exist until the return of Jesus Christ, and that there would always be a descendant of David sitting on that throne. Now, what very big power block, which would also have to be in one way or another related to the house of Israel and Ephraim and Manasseh, let's say. Which big power block has still a throne today on which a descendant of David sits? Again, these are questions which I intend to answer next time. For today, I'd like to ask you to read our free booklets, The Fall and Rise of Britain and America. The Fall and Rise of Britain and America. This booklet goes into the prophecies of the Bible. It also goes into historical records to show you why we can confidently say that the United States of America and Great Britain are in fact the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh, and those prophecies which are given to them, including end-time prophecies, are very clearly destined to be fulfilled in regards to those great power blocks. It is critically important you understand what those prophecies are and what they contain for the future. For today, I thank you very much for your attention, and I remain your Norbert Link for the Standing Watch program.